Hi, my name is Ramon Morales, and I wanted to speak to you a little bit today about a subject that's near and dear to my heart, and that is the history of the internet. Now, many people believe or think that the internet and the World Wide Web are the same thing. As a matter of fact, they're not. So, in order to clarify that, I thought it would be good to kind of like understand a little bit about the origins of the internet, how it developed, and what are the differences between the internet and the World Wide Web. Essentially, the internet was born in the 1950s as a direct consequence of the need to begin the process of integrating the communications infrastructure for the United States' missile defense system. So it actually was born out of a project that was organized under the Defense Department under an entity called the Advanced Research Projects Agency. President Eisenhower in 1959 issued a decree essentially forming ARPA, and within ARPA the project was basically born to create an infrastructure that would permit whoever wanted to communicate with one another to do so in a way that would allow machines and would allow people to be able to do so even though they may be in different places and even though they may have different machines or different computers. And that really was what got it all started. In the 1960s, they recognized that in order to do this effectively, they needed to come up with a way, with a technology, with a methodology to be able to affect this so that it could be done efficiently. And that's what we know today as the Internet Protocol. So the Internet Protocol was born as a direct consequence of the need to integrate many different types of computers, many different types of communications architectures that each one of these computer manufacturers had created. So when the people and the engineers at ARPA began to conceptualize this, they realized that there was a real need to come up with something that would allow all of these disparate computers to be able to interoperate. So they came up with a concept which was, let's build a protocol. Now, why did they call it protocol? Why didn't they call it something else? Why didn't they call it a program? Why didn't they call it an operating system? Well, essentially, they took the word protocol from the language of diplomacy. And as you know, the language of diplomacy is, if you have a protocol establishes a set of rules for ways in which different countries communicate with one another and relate to one another, even if they have different cultures, different backgrounds, different beliefs. But interestingly enough, the protocol is utilized as a way to establish equality of communication. So the people who founded the internet decided that that was the most appropriate way to discuss how they were going to implement this new system. So they called it a protocol, the inter-networking protocol. And this is what was developed in the 60s. By 1983, they were able to get that protocol well organized and integrated to the point that they released it on January 1st, 1983. Now, what are we talking about? We're talking about computers that work as servers that essentially are archives of information, and these computers serve that information to these networks which are governed by the Internet Protocol. And this is something that goes all over the world. But at that time, in 1983, the internet protocol was very, very complex, and in order to be able to use it, you needed to have certain tools to be able to get whatever you wanted to do on the internet. It was very complex. It was still the place for scientists, engineers, academicians. Wasn't a place for the typical human being. So, in 1993, a young engineer out of France came up with something called the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web permitted graphical images, permitted pictures, permitted a way for people to use the internet without knowing any language. And that is what the origin of the World Wide Web is. So, what will we say then is the World Wide Web, and what is its relationship to the internet? Well, the way I like to look at it is, it's as if we were talking about the hardware of a computer. And the hardware is the CPU, the keyboard, the hard disk. All of that is the hardware, the infrastructure. But the World Wide Web is like an application. It's like speaking about Word or speaking about Excel. It's an application that allows people to use that infrastructure called the internet to be able to communicate with one another easily. Now, today, people think that the internet and the World Wide Web are the same thing. In fact, they're not. One is an infrastructure and the other is an application or a means to permit people to use this hardware in much the same way as we use applications to have access to the infrastructure.